In these next two movies, we'll look at how software gets represented in deployment diagrams. We'll start with execution environments, which are typically containers for other software artifacts to be deployed to. Then look at artifacts and the relationship between artifacts and components. Finally, we'll see how artifacts can be deployed to nodes and how the deployment can be specified with deployment specifications. Execution environment is a subtype of node. Whereas a device is a hardware environment, an execution environment provides a software environment in which software artifacts can be deployed. It's typically some kind of system software or container for software to run in, like an operating system, a virtual machine, an application server, or a database management system. Like nodes and devices, execution environments are shown as a cuboid, this time with the stereotype execution environment at the top. They can be a type or an instance. The diagram here shows the Android operating system as an execution environment on an Android smartphone. Artifacts are the pieces of software or other information that are deployed onto nodes. They may be intermediate or final products of a software development process. They include program code in the form of source files, scripts, or executables, and can also include things like help files or database tables. They're shown as a class rectangle with a stereotype artifact, a little icon that looks like a document in the top right, or both. Artifacts are the physical manifestation of software components, so they can be related to the software components that they manifest. This can be shown graphically using a manifest dependency from the artifact to the component. Artifacts are deployed onto nodes, usually shown as devices or execution environments. They can be shown as a list in the node or graphically nested inside the node as here. Or they can be shown with a deploy dependency between the artifact and the node as here. Deployment specifications provide the properties that are necessary to deploy an artifact effectively. The properties are defined in the type and the actual values in instances. You can think of them as configuration files, and they may be separate or packaged up in an assembly like a WAR file. They're shown as a rectangle with the stereotype deployment spec at the top, and they're linked to the artifact that they specify the deployment of with a dependency. So let's add some execution environments and artifacts to deployment diagrams in EA. Here we are in the home automation model, and I'll open up the deployment view and the home network package. I'm going to add a new diagram to the home network package called controller, which will focus on the structure of the deployment onto the controller. It'll be a deployment diagram. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'll add controller from the project browser as a link. So this is a type, not an instance. I'm going to resize it, and I'm going to add an execution environment. To add it, I click on Execution Environment in the toolbox and then Inside Controller. I'll call this Spring. Now I'm going to add two artifacts into the execution environment. These are hacontrol.jar and x10comms.jar. So I'll click on Artifact in the toolbox and then in the execution environment. So the first is hacontrol.jar, and I do the same again for x10comms.jar. Now I'll add a deployment specification. Again, I click in the toolbox on deployment specification and click into the execution environment. This is going to be x10comms.cfg, which is short for config. Finally, I'll add the dependencies between hacontrol.jar and x10comms.jar and between x10comms.config and x10comms.jar. You might think that that dependency between the deployment spec and the artifact should be the other way round, but that's the way it's specified in UML. We'll take a break here and come back to add the manifest dependency between x10comms component and the x10comms.jar artifact, and to add a deployment diagram showing instances.